I never thought of myself as the jealous or paranoid type. Emily, my wife of 6 years, had been working late a lot recently. It was nothing unusual. I trusted her. She had a demanding job, deadlines to meet, and long hours were just part of life. Or so I thought. Then last Friday happened. I had just finished eating dinner alone when my phone buzzed. "Hey babe, working late again. Don't wait up. Love you." I sent back a quick, "Okay, love you too," and went to turn on the TV. But then, almost absent-mindedly, I did something I had never done before. I opened the Find My iPhone app. Maybe it was boredom, maybe some gut feeling I hadn't quite processed yet. Either way, the moment her location popped up on the screen, my stomach turned to lead. She wasn't at the office. Her phone's blinking dot was across town at a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, a high-end, dimly lit place we had only ever gone to for special occasions. For a few seconds, I tried to rationalize it. A business dinner? A last-minute meeting with a client? But the longer I stared at that screen, the harder it became to convince myself that everything was fine. Something was wrong. I could have called her. I could have texted and asked. But instead, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. The drive across town felt like a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my mind spinning through every possibility. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was about to make a fool of myself. But deep down, I already knew. When I arrived, the restaurant's golden lights glowed softly against the dark evening sky. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the quiet murmur of conversation, the clink of glasses, and the scent of expensive food. A host glanced at me, poised to ask if I had a reservation, but I barely heard him. I was already scanning the room. And then I saw her. Emily was sitting at a small, candlelit table for two, dressed in the sleek black dress I loved on her, leaning in close to a man I had never seen before. She was laughing at something he said, her fingers lightly brushing his wrist in an intimate, familiar way. The way she used to touch me. A cold weight settled in my chest. A waiter approached their table, holding a bottle of champagne, his smile warm and knowing. "Compliments of the gentleman," he said, setting it down between them. Emily turned, still laughing, then froze. Her eyes widened, color draining from her face as she saw me standing there, just a few feet away. "Honey," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You were supposed to be at work." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her breath catching. "Honey, I can explain." But before she could get another word out, the waiter, still oblivious, chuckled. "Oh, you must be her husband. I see your wife here all the time with." Emily's foot lashed out under the table, catching him hard in the shin, but it was too late. The damage was done. I heard my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Emily sat frozen, her fingers still gripping the champagne glass. I tilted my head. "Go on, babe. You were about to explain." Her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for an escape, but there was none. It's not what it looks like," she whispered. I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Really? Because it looks like you're on a date. Drinking champagne. With him." I turned my gaze toward the man across from her. Nathan, I later learned, who now looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "Hey man," he started, hands raised. I didn't know she was married. I cut him off with a look. Didn't ask. The waiter, finally sensing the tension, took a cautious step back. I'll give you some space." He practically scurried away. I turned back to Emily. "So, how long?" Her breath hitched. It's not serious." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That wasn't the question. She swallowed hard. "A few months." My jaw clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "So, every time you said you were working late, you were actually here?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Nathan pushed back his chair abruptly. "Look, I don't need this drama." He tossed some cash onto the table and stood. I lifted a hand, blocking his path. "Sit down." He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Emily's hands were shaking now. "Please," she whispered. "Can we just go home and talk about this?" I smiled again, colder this time. "Oh, we'll talk. But not the way you think." Her eyes filled with fresh panic. She had no idea. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped a few times. Then I turned the screen toward her. Bank statements. Highlighted transactions from this exact restaurant. On nights she had told me she was at the office. I swiped. Hotel bookings. Some high-end, some cheap. Every single one made during her supposed overtime hours. I swiped again. Call logs. I had gone through our phone bill, extracted the numbers she contacted the most, and followed the trail straight to Nathan. Emily's face turned ashen. Nathan groaned. "Oh, come on." He turned to Emily. "You told me you were separated." I let out a low laugh. "Separated? We live in the same house." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. It's complicated." I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "No, Emily. It's very simple. You cheated. You lied. And now you're caught." Nathan grabbed his coat, standing abruptly. "Yeah, I'm done." This time, I let him leave. He practically ran out of there. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. "Please. Let's go home. Let's talk." I shook my head. "I don't think so." Then, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out something she never saw coming, a manila envelope. I dropped it onto the table in front of her. "Congratulations, Emily," I said quietly. "You just won yourself a divorce." Her breath hitched as she stared at the papers like they might explode in her hands. "I've been suspicious for a while," I admitted. "So I got ahead of things. This is everything the lawyer needs." She looked up at me, eyes pleading, but I was already standing. "Enjoy your dinner." And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving her sitting there in the candlelight, completely shattered. I didn't look back as I walked out of that restaurant, but I could feel it, the weight of every single stare drilling into Emily's back. The entire place had gone silent. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered in midair. People were watching, some pretending not to, others making no effort to hide their curiosity. And Emily? She was still sitting there, frozen in horror, a manila envelope containing her worst nightmare resting on the table in front of her. I was halfway to the exit when I heard her chair scrape loudly against the floor. "Wait," she called, her voice breaking as she practically tripped over herself rushing after me. I turned just as she reached me, her breathing ragged, her face pale. "Please," she whispered, desperation thick in her voice. We can fix this." I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "You mean your little working late routine? Your hotel hookups?" Tears welled in her eyes. It was a mistake." I laughed, loud and sharp, the sound cutting through the quiet tension in the restaurant. A few diners turned to look. Emily flinched. "Please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we just go home and talk?" I leaned in close, lowering my voice just for her. "Emily, you weren't planning to talk when you were drinking champagne with your boyfriend. You weren't thinking about our home when you were checking into hotels." I straightened, taking a slow step back. "So no, Emily, we're not going home." Her face crumbled. I turned to the waiter, the poor guy who had been caught in the crossfire of this whole disaster. "Hey, do me a favor," I said, pulling out my wallet. He blinked. Sure." I handed him my card. "Put their dinner on her tab." Emily let out a strangled noise. "What?" I smirked. "You've been stealing from me this whole time. Might as well pay for your own damn date." And with that, I walked out, leaving her standing there, humiliated, heartbroken, and completely alone. But I knew Emily wasn't done. Not because she loved me. No, that ship had sailed the second she popped that champagne. She wasn't done because she had everything to lose. And I was about to make sure she lost all of it. By the time I got home, my phone was already blowing up. "Please, just talk to me. I messed up, but we can fix this. I don't even care about Nathan. He was just a distraction. I love you." Oh, now she loved me. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded everything, bank records, phone logs, the full paper trail, to my lawyer. Then, for good measure, I sent a few choice screenshots to her parents, and to our mutual friends, and to her sister, who had never liked her and was about to have the time of her life with this information. Within hours, Emily's perfect little world started crumbling. Her mom called me first, her voice quiet, stunned. I don't even know what to say. She told us she was happy. I sighed. Guess she was happier with Nathan. Her sister? Oh, she went nuclear. I knew she was trash, she texted back almost immediately. I'm so sorry you had to deal with this. Also, I'm telling everyone. Then Emily made one last desperate move. She showed up at my house. She banged on the door, voice shaking. Chris, please, just talk to me. I opened the door, arms crossed. You should go. Tears streamed down her face. I don't have anywhere else to go. I smiled, slow and cold. That, I said, sounds like a you problem. Then I shut the door in her face. Emily thought the worst was over. She thought that if she cried enough, if she begged enough, I'd eventually let her weasel her way back in. She was wrong, because I wasn't just going to divorce her. I was going to make sure she walked away with nothing. The weekend after everything blew up, we had a family gathering at her parents' house, something that had been planned weeks ago. Emily must have assumed I wouldn't show up. So when I walked in, cool as ever, she looked like she was about to be sick. She rushed over, hissing under her breath, "What are you doing here?" I smiled. "Oh, don't worry, honey. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Before she could drag me outside, her sister stood up and cleared her throat. "Since Emily is too much of a coward to say it herself, I figured I'd help," she announced. Then she turned to the family. "Emily's been cheating on Chris for months." Dead silence. Emily's mom gasped. Her dad sat there, red-faced, shaking his head. And Emily? Completely frozen. The relatives started whispering. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." Emily spun toward me, eyes wild. "You told them?" I shrugged. "Nah. I just sent the proof. Your sister did the honors." Emily whirled toward her mom, her voice frantic. "It wasn't like that. I made a mistake." Her mother cut her off. "You lied to all of us. How could you?" Emily's mouth opened, then closed. Then, just when she thought it couldn't get worse, Nathan walked in. Or rather, Nathan tried to walk in. He barely made it past the doorway before Emily's dad turned, his voice like thunder. "Get the hell out of my house." Nathan didn't argue. He just turned and ran. And Emily? For the first time that night, she looked truly defeated. She had lost everything. And I had never felt better. Emily didn't stick around after that. Her parents were furious. Her sister dragged her through the mud. Half the family wouldn't even look at her. She stormed out of the house, humiliated, disgraced, exposed. I, on the other hand, stayed. I chatted with her relatives like nothing had happened, laughing over drinks, enjoying the rest of the evening. And Nathan, he ghosted her. He probably realized that a woman who cheated on her own husband wasn't exactly long-term material. Fast forward a few months, divorce finalized. Money. All mine. House. She never saw a dime of it. Emily, on the other hand, living in a tiny apartment. Broke. Isolated. A complete wreck. Then one night my phone buzzed. A single text. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a few seconds. Then I smiled and left her on read.